Hello, everybody. I'm Lori Hutchison, Executive Director of the Lobular Breast Cancer Alliance. And today I'm speaking with Lynn Collins, who has agreed to become the first patient advocate to take on the new role of metastatic lobular breast cancer patient advocate representative on the LBCA Patient Advocate Advisory Board. Welcome, Lynn, and thank you. And thank you, too, for agreeing to speak to us today about what your experience with metastatic lobular breast cancer has been and your roles as a patient advocate. So I'm going to start with a question about you. If you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your life apart from or before your cancer diagnosis, and when and how you were diagnosed with metastatic lobular breast cancer, and so on.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to all of the things that we'll be able to work on together for lobular awareness. I am from West Virginia, and before my diagnosis, I worked in the public school system as a special education teacher. Um, I have two daughters, and so I've been doing some single mom, single parenting prior to that and since my diagnosis. And I was diagnosed with metastatic invasive lobular cancer de novo in February of 2019. Um, Part of the challenge with that is being in West Virginia, there hasn't been a lot of information and support for that. It's barely even recognized as a different type of breast cancer. Um, and so my journey or my connection with the Lobular Breast Cancer Alliance began at that diagnosis when I started to look for information about specifically about lobular breast cancer because it wasn't being talked about and wasn't being mentioned um, with any type of specificity or particular focus on that subtype. So that was my initial introduction to LBCA.
So you found LBCA in 2019 after your diagnosis? Was it
Right.
because a doctor told you about it or was it your own search?
It was my own search. I had left West Virginia to go to Cleveland Clinic for a second opinion. And that's when I really heard more conversation about lobular, the word lobular and the type lobular. And as I kept hearing that from the doctors and medical team that kept saying that diagnosis over and over. It was referred to a few times as a slow growing cancer, um, but nothing that was really specific. But I think, like all patients, whenever you're initially diagnosed, we run to the internet and start looking for information. And when I did, the LBCA site popped up. And so I became very familiar with the LBCA site right from the very beginning.
And can you tell us where your metastases is in your body?
Yes. At initial diagnosis, I had innumerable metastases throughout my skeleton, starting at the skull and all down the spine, shoulders, ribs, pelvic area, both hips, into the femurs, and also into both arms as well, the upper arm areas.
Wow. And did they say how long they thought you had had lobular breast cancer in you?
Um, they said because and that was kind of how I was clued into lobular being a little bit different. They said that I had probably had this going on for quite some time. I never detected a lump in self-examinations. I never detected a lump. I detected breast changes, tissue, what felt like tissue changes. But it felt more like lumpy breast tissue or thickened breast tissue instead of an actual clump or lump, anything that I would identify as a clump or lump in the breast itself. And it seemed like it did fluctuate and change hormonally, and never thought for a million years that it would be breast cancer. I had had children, my girls later in life, at 32 and at 38, but I breastfed both of them for a couple of years each, which we were told at the time, that that is a very protective thing to do for breast cancer. Never thought that it would be in my radar since I had taken those steps to do the extended breastfeeding. And it was only detected because I actually found a lump in my armpit. That one was a very palpable lump because it was all contained within the lymph node instead of being spread out across through the breast tissue. So it was detectable by that lymph node lump, and that's what started the whole process of mammogram. I hadn't had one at that point. I was 47 years old, and hadn't had a mammogram at that point because the recommendation at the time was between 45 and 50, depending upon family history. And I had no family history of any breast cancer, but we did have a strong history of thyroid disease. And so my primary care physician and I discussed, weighed out the pros and cons of starting mammograms at 45, but opted to delay it since I had the protective measures of extended breastfeeding, opted to delay that until age 50 to avoid some of the excessive radiation to that chest and neck area since we did have a strong family history of the thyroid disease. So hadn't had any mammograms or anything until that initial detection.
Can you talk a little bit about how and when you decided you wanted to help raise more awareness, help educate others about lobular breast cancer and metastatic lobular breast cancer, and sort of what you've been doing?
hmm Um, for me, it was a slow start because with my diagnosis coming in 2019 and then the pandemic hitting right after that, a lot of things as far as connection, in-person connections, conferences and things, those were all paused and all on hold. So I was a webinar junkie and a social media and internet research junkie there for the first couple of years. And all of the information and connections that I would see, opportunities for connections that I would see based around lobular, all were stemming from the LBCA and information that was being put out. And as I learned more about metastatic breast cancer in general, I learned that it was different with lobular and that it wasn't being talked about, it wasn't being addressed. And in order for me to get the information that I needed, I had to identify who the helpers were, who the sources were. And I knew that as a person who was very interested and educated enough to use those resources and to access those, I knew that if I was having difficulty, others were as well, especially in these rural areas where we don't have a lot of access, and education is a major concern. So I felt like in order for me to have a good understanding of my disease and be a good advocate for myself, I had to educate myself, but then knowing that that wasn't enough for others, I felt like I needed to help spread that awareness and share the information with everyone else as well.
So I know that you've been doing a lot on the internet. I know that you've been helping to administer the private metastatic lobular breast cancer patient Facebook page. You've been supporting the two metastatic lobular breast cancer support groups that are virtual. Can you tell us about how those are going, what else you're doing?
hmm Um, those groups have been fantastic. The support groups have been wonderful. We have two organizations that are doing a beautiful job of getting the word out and inviting people in, helping them to feel welcome, and giving us the space to talk about some of the challenges and concerns that we have with having lobular disease. We have good moderators, and we have good groups, good participants that join in to talk about all of those things. We also have on our online Facebook group, that one was started several years before I got involved. That was the first one that I joined, was that MILC support group on Facebook. At the time, we had some moderator admins who have passed away since then. But I learned a lot from them, a lot of really educated and pivotal, influential people in the lobular space were on there, and they have been mentors to me throughout that experience. And we continue to have a good active membership and involvement there. Lots of information is shared. We talk about the different webinars that are being offered, particularly those that are focused on lobular disease. We talk a lot about the doctors who are specializing in lobular disease. We talk about the research that's coming out on lobular disease. So it's a great place to have those conversations and make connections, and help to be able to spread the word. Being involved with LBCA has been probably the most active part of getting that information out, because we're coming directly to the source to get that. The LAT teams that were developed, I got involved a little bit with that, but not having any teammates in West Virginia. I'm a Lone Ranger kind of team as far as local and regional.
Far, so far.
So
We'll
far,
help you
that's
get
right.
that going.
Yes, we will for sure. But I've learned a lot from just participating in that, from the other patients as well. Not all metastatic patients, of course, but getting to hear what they're doing in their local areas has been very helpful, because that helps me to know what do I need to do, as far as conversations and getting information out to my local groups. So I've taken a lot of the LBCA literature to the cancer center where I'm treated locally. I've taken it to, we only have one facility within our state that has a breast specialist. And so I've taken information to them. Anytime I have scans or tests or anything like that, I always go to the LBCA site to print out the handout that you can use to share with your radiologists and folks, to talk about the unique sites of lobular metastases, and make sure that I hand that to them or talk with them about it. Just had some scans yesterday and was able to talk with the two technicians who were administering my MRIs yesterday about the unique nature of lobular. So there's lots of opportunities for education. The field is ripe here for all the planting and sowing.
Yeah, it's great. And actually, I think we're going to share with the story, when it's in our newsletter and when it's posted on the website, information about the name of the private Facebook group, so people can reach out and get involved in that if they want. And the two metastatic lobular breast cancer support groups, you can drop into. So we'll put the link there for those. One we're doing in partnership with Share Cancer Support, and the other we're doing with breastcancer.org. And we're so grateful to both of those for having the platform to make this happen. So I think just one more question. Oh, and I do want to also I'll add for people listening who may not know, when you mentioned LAT, it's short for local advocacy teams. And we launched those about 2 years ago, I think, when I met you, Jolynn, in Pittsburgh, at that symposium, that lobular breast cancer symposium. We announced and we started supporting groups in their own geographies, form local advocacy teams as satellites of LBCA to do in-person activities, like you mentioned, sharing brochures and getting the word out. And so we'll put information about the local advocacy team meeting that you referenced, which is a virtual meeting that we have monthly for people who are interested maybe in starting something in their own geography in the US. Right now it's we're supporting it happening in the US, although we'll help people connect elsewhere in the country too if they're interested. I mean, in the world. if they're interested. Um, so last question for you. Can you just share your perspective on where you think it's most critical to raise our voices now about metastatic lobular breast cancer and the need for more research?
Um, I think probably for me, the area that I'm most passionate about advocating surrounds imaging, because that's the first step. With the challenges that we have for detecting lobular disease on imaging, I feel like we really need to focus on that intensely. Novel tracers, novel targets, figuring out a protocol to best utilize the current modalities that we do have, I think is very important because we cannot treat what we do not see, what we do not know is there. And based on the research that has been put out, less than 50% of the disease that is known or confirmed upon death for metastatic patients has been detected on imaging. And that's a huge problem. That is very scary and it is of great concern. So, that is probably what I'm most concerned about and most passionate about working on right now. Of course, we would love to see some out of the box creative thinking as far as treatment goes because lobular behaves differently. And I think that some of the research that we're seeing in other areas that's tumor agnostic, things that would be specifically for solid tumors, but maybe not breast cancer, not specific to breast cancer. Um, Drugs that would have normally been used for lung cancer, colon cancer, or whatever. I think trying to use some of those maybe in different combinations with some of the drugs that we do have for breast cancer might be some interesting ways that research could be focused on targeting treatments that would be specific to lobular disease. But before we can even get to that, we have to know that the disease is there. So, not just for the metastatic patients who have already incurred that spread, but particularly for our early stage patients who have confirmed disease that may be still local or regional. Upping the surveillance game and upping our imaging, um, I guess, abilities is key for not just the metastatic patients, but for the early stage patients as well.
Yeah, for all of us, really. Well,
Yes.
you are already an amazing patient advocate for more information and research for lobular breast cancer and metastatic lobular breast cancer, and for also supporting others with this disease. And I'm just so grateful that you agreed to join us now on the Patient Advocate Advisory Board, stepping into a slot that we created because one of our founding patient advocates, Julia Levine, passed away from metastatic lobular breast cancer research, and she sure was a sort of a single voice among many of you, but I think it's partly because of her efforts, and now we'll be sustaining, thanks to you and all of the other metastatic lobular breast cancer patients, working with you and with us to make sure that the metastatic lobular breast cancer patient voice is always a part of all we do. And we do have a web page on our website for metastatic lobular breast cancer information and resources. I think we have a graphic there of where lobular metastases might travel to. That graphic is also translated into 19 languages. And I think one of the things on the Patient Advocate Advisory Board, which we all do, is think about what new resources we might want. And as we develop our new imaging manual, hopefully we'll be adding more about the coming new research for all lobular breast cancer and imaging. Anyway, this past year, we also just launched the first solicitation for metastatic lobular breast cancer research, and we'll be awarding that in a collaboration with Komen. And that will be wonderful. And hopefully we'll get some more clinical trials going eventually as well. So any last thoughts before we say goodbye for the moment?
I'm glad that you mentioned Julia because that was one of the biggest reasons that I became as passionate about lobular research and lobular awareness is because of Julia. She was very inspiring. She was very much a mentor in guiding my journey personally with learning about lobular disease and being able to get connected with lobular resources and knowing about the ILC symposium. If it hadn't been for her being one of those guiding mentors and teaching me about the space and the importance and the significance of advocating for lobular awareness, I don't think that I would have known a fraction of what I know, and being able to work with her in the metastatic working group that we had previously, and seeing how passionate she was, is definitely inspiring, and I'm very grateful and very honored to be able to continue working in her honor as well.